Okay, hopefully this won't be too distracting for you. If it is, I can certainly get it out of the way. My name is Craig Lefteroff, and I am the Technology Innovation Librarian at the Commission here. Today we'll be talking about makerspaces, so we'll talk about the concepts behind makerspaces.
I'm doing it. I have to go to the bathroom.
We're just doing the introductory stuff, so.
Okay.
We'll talk about the concepts that kind of fuel makerspaces and some of the devices that you might find in a makerspace, and also get into policies and a few other things as well. Before I get started with my stuff, a little bit of housekeeping. The restrooms are your marked directions, so feel free if you need to get out and walk around.
To the right, to the right, to
the right. 3 rights, okay. And if you just need to take a break and walk around, that's certainly fine as well. I know that if I have to listen to someone speak for 3 hours, I get really depressed. So please, feel free to get up. And if you guys need to pick me up, there's a bowl of candy in the back. I know it's breakfast time, and Hershey's Kisses are probably not a recommended breakfast food, but if you need them, they're there. Okay, so before I get started, I am going to give you these, and if you guys need a pen, let me know. I have extras. We work on these throughout the presentation. And before I do anything, what I would like for you to do is complete that first line, one item that you would have in your makerspace. If you don't know what a makerspace is, if you don't have any idea, just write something down. It doesn't matter what. It could be a puppy. These pictures might give you some clue as to what you might include. Okay, are you all done? Very good. So, what is it? Well, the term makerspace, people say that it originated with hacker spaces, and when I hear the term hacker, I usually think about, losing my credit card information or getting, my identity stolen, but these aren't really necessarily negative activities. Hacker spaces kind of go back to the original definition of that term hack. It's a space where people can take things apart and figure out how they work. So they would take apart hardware, or they would break programs down to figure out what the code did. All in a community setting, all in a group setting, and people say that that kind of grew into this whole makerspace concept. This is a picture. This is a picture of a hackerspace, and you can see that it doesn't look like some sort of den of criminal activity. It's more or less just people breaking things down to figure out what's going on inside. So, as a term, Makerspace was coined around 2005. It's pretty much tied to Make magazine, which is a periodical that has projects and reviews of devices and different things like that. So you'll hear them mentioned basically in tandem. Whenever you hear Makerspace, you'll probably hear Make mentioned pretty closely in connection with it. Makerspace.com was actually registered by Make magazine, and that began in 2011, and that's really when this whole concept entered the public consciousness in kind of a prevalent way. One thing that I'll keep going back to during this presentation is that you can have a makerspace with pretty much anything. There is no requirement that you have to have this device or a 3D printer or a CNC router. There's no makerspace police that's going to shut you down if you have the wrong things. You can pretty much have anything, and it's more or less that you're working from the concept of a makerspace than that you have a list of particular items. One thing that you will probably want to keep in mind is that Makerspace is different from the Maker movement, and Maker movement is a little bit more specific, a little more rigid. That means that you're creating physical items using computers, digital tools, and programs. So in that case, if you're talking about the Maker movement, that obviously would imply that you would have certain items operating in your activity. Makerspace is different from that. It's a much broader and more general concept. Okay, so I really don't like it when people read stuff from their PowerPoints, but just to save your eyes, I will read you some of these definitions. This is from various sources around the web. Makerspaces are creative DIY spaces where people can gather to create, invent, and learn. In libraries, they often have 3D printers, software, electronics, craft and hardware supplies, and tools, and more. Makerspace is a physical location where people gather to share resources and knowledge, work on projects, network, and build. They provide tools and space in a community environment, a library, community center, private organization, or campus. And from our favorite Wikipedia, in a library makerspace, patrons of varying ages can work together alone or with library staff on creative projects. These spaces often give community members access to tools, technology, and social connections that may not be easily accessible otherwise. The goal is to allow patrons to learn through direct experimentation and from each other. And if there's anything we can glean from these varying definitions, I think that, one, they're all pretty general. They don't tell you a makerspace is a room that's 9 by 6 or something and has CNC routers. It's more or less just, it's a physical location where people can work together and be creative. And another thing that I take from these definitions is that libraries are really already doing this sort of stuff. We have people coming in to do, knitting and craft sort of programs, and we've been doing it for a long time, even before smiling became a trend for photographs. So, it's something that's been established in libraries, and it's part of what we do. With a makerspace, really, it's just the tools that have changed, but the concepts are basically things that are fundamental to library service. If you want to think of it in a very general kind of universal sense, the library is a place of learning more than anything else, I think, and this fits right in with that definition. Would you guys like that door closed? Will that? Okay. And if it gets too warm or stuffy in here, we can always open it back up. Sorry about the lack of windows. Thank you. Okay, so let's say that you're on board with setting up a makerspace in your library. There are a few things you'll want to consider before you start planning the actual space and what will be included. There are things that will guide you in terms of how successful it might be with your users or your patrons or civilians or whatever you call your people. One would be, have your previous crafty or sort of how-to DIY programs been really well attended? That could indicate that there is strong interest in your community in this sort of creative endeavor. I would also start thinking about how techy your patrons are and let that guide your buying choices, because if you have people who are still using Windows XP or they mostly use their computers to play solitaire, they're not necessarily going to be so welcoming to the latest bleeding edge device that requires all sorts of special skills. You'll also probably want to think about space, because a makerspace does mean physical space. Some of this equipment is very large, some of it's pretty immobile, so you'll want to think about the sort of space that you have in your building, whether you're going to put your devices there permanently or try to move them around, and that will guide your buying choices as well. Money would be a consideration, obviously. We don't need to explain that. I would also start thinking about your current staff, not just in terms of having enough people to operate the space effectively, but in terms of their talent and what they can do already. If you have a staff member who's a whiz at sewing, I think that just makes the purchase of sewing devices a little bit more compelling. If you have someone who's very artistic and good at doing digital art on the computer, that could dovetail right in with 3D printing or something else like that. Okay, so back to space for a second. There are free resources out there on the internet that you can use to plan your space before you actually buy devices and put your hands on them. This one is floorplanner.com, and basically the way it works is they have icons that represent common office furniture like desks and so on. Obviously, they don't have CNC routers and 3D printers because most people won't use those for their rooms, but you can upload your image so you can bring in that 3D printer, as I'm doing in this animation right there, and at least plan out your space's organization. With Floor Planner, you can set up one room for free and then they charge you. I think it's the same with Room Sketcher, and there are other alternatives out there that can help you design your space.
Yes. Add something about that.
Absolutely.
The other thing to be really careful about, besides the physical room, is where do you have plugins, where do you have access? I'm just saying sometimes it isn't always represented on this, and you have to, you have to be able to think about that too. Where
Absolutely.
You may want to put it there, but the plugins.
Right, and you don't want these large wires streaming across your floor. I would say on the whole, as a general rule, as many plugs as you can get would work to your benefit because you will definitely need them. And also windows, which we'll talk about in a minute probably. If you don't have a permanent fixed space, that doesn't mean that a makerspace is out of your grasp. There are lots of smaller devices, smaller kits that are very mobile friendly. You can just stick them in one of these plastic tubs with casters or wheels and move them all around the library. So in this photograph, there is an Arduino kit, which we'll get into more. There's duct tape, there's a mathematics kit, and there's some sort of scraping dental device over there. So
I think those are crochet hooks or something.
There you go. You guys see how adept I am at sewing and that sort of thing. So crochet hooks, lovely. But basically, you can put a lot into one of these kits, and you can have a lot of diversity in terms of the activities that they can provide. So if you can't accommodate one of these large monolithic devices that we'll talk about, that does not mean that you can't have a makerspace. You can have a makerspace that fits onto this top of this podium, or you can have something that occupies the entire back wall. There's a lot of variety in terms of devices. So let's talk a little bit about devices. The 3D printer you see right here on the end of the desk, it's kind of in between. It's not a Arduino kit, which you can fit probably in 2 hands, but it's also not a CNC router. It's pretty bulky, and it does require some space to accommodate its placement. But as I said, there are other devices that are smaller, and these are much more cost efficient as well. So the Makey kit's less than $50, and you can do a whole lot with it, as we'll see. The Raspberry Pi is less than $70. It's also pretty robust. You can actually use this to create a display for your library. You can use it to create a card catalog, as I just learned last week. You can do all sorts of things with it. And the Little Bits kit is less than $100. That also has a lot of diversity in terms of projects that are available. While we're talking about funding and money, we probably need to talk about grants. If you don't have money in your budget set aside for your makerspace, you'll want to pursue outside funding, and that means that you're probably looking at grants from government sources like LSTA grants. I believe that Lincoln received an LSTA grant to partially fund their makerspace, and UTAN also has done the same. So definitely look at those, but also don't neglect those private sector sources because they're out there. You guys who read the listservs have probably seen that Best Buy has their program of funds. I believe the deadline is the end of this month for libraries. There's also a Staples community grant that's accessible. Any company that deals with technology, I think, is worth checking into, just to see if they have grant funding available. And if you just run a Google or Bing search for company name, community grants, or technology grants, you'll find more information about those. Another source of funding or material support, I guess, would be community partnerships. If there's already someone in your community who's doing something similar, they might be willing to assist you with setting up your space. So that's a good way to go. And crowdfunding is also another alternative. These are screenshots of various crowdfunding platforms. I believe that is, sorry, I think it's Donors Choose and GoFundMe. But you can see you can get a lot of money from crowdsourcing. This is a Fab Lab from San Diego that got almost $33,000. There's another one, Makerspace and Hackerspace, that got over $10,000. And then there are smaller amounts, but the Makerspace for Pershing's library has over $400, only 8 donors. So not necessarily a huge quantity of donors, but the gift amount is pretty impressive. I think an important stage of setting up your funding is to identify people who will support this idea, and this will also be beneficial later on in the process. If you can find people in your community who are prominent and who can speak eloquently about the need for this sort of thing, that will be to your benefit, and you can point to these people when you go to your funding sources and say, look, there's community support for this already. Another thing that I think you probably should do is identify other agencies or groups in your community that are doing the same sorts of things. So if you have, I'm sure you guys probably don't have a makerspace per se in your town, okay? But you might have craft shops, you might have art studios, things like that. So you can cite those as examples of a need in your community for that sort of creative work in a collaborative environment. And you can also say, look, these people are doing this, but they're not doing this. So we're not necessarily going to duplicate what this art studio or this craft shop is doing. That's pretty important when it comes to impressing funders, I think. If there's already a Coke, don't be Coke, be Pepsi instead, that whole idea. Okay, so let's say that none of that works out, it's terrible, you don't have any funding at all. That doesn't mean a makerspace is out of your reach. If you can't even afford a makey kit for $50, you can still have a makerspace. This is an image of a cardboard challenge, and you guys know that cardboard is, it's pretty common. You can find it everywhere. The whole idea behind this is that people are repurposing cardboard into these new creative items, and they're working together to do it. So it's almost like a competitive sort of environment, who can make cardboard into the coolest sort of thing and most useful thing. And that fits right into the whole makerspace idea of reusing items and recycling. That's very important to this whole movement. Another low-cost thing that you can find everywhere, especially when you step on them, is Legos. You could do a Lego challenge, or something like perler beads are pretty cheap as well. So those are all low-cost alternatives to the sort of more techie or high-cost makerspace items. And if none of that works out, you could set up a donation box, not necessarily for money, but more or less for household items, scrap parts, things that people can repurpose. People always have vacuum cleaners that are going bad. They're always getting rid of TVs, computers. So that might be a low-cost way to build up your makerspace. Okay, so let's say you get your funding ready. Let's say you know what you want to buy generally. I know I want to have a CNC router. I know I want to have some cardboard. I want to have perler beads. You'll probably want to look at vendor sites with reviews, and I use Amazon just because I think it gets the most traffic. So for 3D printers in this example, I have one that's almost $2,000, one that's almost $400, and then one that's kind of in between, the Lulzbot Mini. The reviews on here are really helpful. You can break them down into positive only or negative only. And for most items, they do have answered questions and more details, so that will give you a little more information about the individual devices before you buy them. In addition to that, there are tech sites on the internet that you should probably check periodically. I mentioned 3 here, The Verge, Ars Technica, and Slashdot. Let me give you one more, TechCrunch, which is basically more devoted to items that are brand new or on the horizon. So they actually cover items that are still in the Kickstarter process, where people are trying to get funding for that initial wave of devices. And they're good at basically giving you information about the items that are going to be the hot items a year from now or 2 years from now. So definitely check those sources. And most of those tech sites do annual buying guides for particular devices, so the best 3D printers you can buy in 2016 and things like that. So if you run a search on the site, you can probably find those pretty easily. There is also Reddit, which is very expansive. It's basically a forum for people to post about pretty much anything that comes to their mind. And there are sections of Reddit devoted to general activities like 3D printing. There are also sections devoted to individual manufacturers like Solidoodle, which is what our 3D printer is. And those manufacturer sites are pretty good to kind of do a cursory glance through, because you'll find out quickly whether people are satisfied with their device or not. These are people who are just who haven't just pulled it out of the box fresh. These are people who have used it for months and months. So you can see how well these items hold up. Do you guys have any questions or anything while I swallow? Okay. Other places you can go. I would check with other libraries, especially here in Nebraska, and you can do that locally. There's also a listserv that's pretty low traffic, but the messages on there are really helpful and beneficial. It's called Library Makerspace. So if you're thinking about doing a Makerspace, I would definitely subscribe to that listserv. It's really, it's good information. You could also check with a non-library makerspace, either locally or somewhere else. You can check a makerspace directory, or you can go to our new site at the Library Commission. Creative, Innovative, and Makerspaces in Nebraska. A few of my coworkers have put this together specifically to collect information about this activity in our state. They're including public libraries at the top, but they've also got private sector entities here as well. So if you're trying to put together a makerspace, it might be a good idea to check this page and see who's doing what in the community and what sorts of activities they're promoting. And if you guys are aware of any resources that should live on this page but don't, please do get in touch with us. There's a contact us link at the bottom here. So it'll send an email right to my coworker Lisa, and she'll go ahead and add that space.
Where do you get to this page?
If you start off on the Library Commission site, there's a search box here, and just punch in Makerspaces. Sure, and it's the very top link.
Will you be sending me PowerPoint to this?
I will, yes. I should have told you that. Sorry, you guys don't necessarily have to take tons of notes. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, after this is done, I will send you the PowerPoint, the video, and also the handouts, so you'll have extra copies. You might be able to see some of these items at your bigger box sort of electronic stores like Best Buy and Office big box stores. But to be honest with you, a lot of these devices are still so new that they're not really distributed widely throughout the nation. They're still niche items. You won't necessarily find CNC routers at Walmart or Staples or something like that. And in many cases, as I said when we were talking about TechCrunch, these items are still kind of in the production mode, and they aren't necessarily even at the first wave of finished products. So I wouldn't necessarily get your hopes up about seeing them in person in your community, but maybe give the store a ring and see if they might have something that you could view, like a 3D printer. Okay, let's talk about policies. And I love this headline because it makes us sound like school marms or something. 3D printers and these Makerspace devices will fit right in some cases to existing policies, but there are additional considerations that you'll want to keep in mind. One that is an existing concern in libraries, but has a different aspect with these devices is copyright and patent infringement and trademark. With 3D printers, theoretically, someone could print off Mickey Mouse heads all day long and sell them, which is obviously a little iffy in terms of copyright. We already provide tools that could be abused in the field of copyright, like copy machines and various other things. So you guys probably have existing policies in place. In many cases, those would cover your 3D printing and your various other makerspace activities as well. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. One thing that might be new with these devices is that they can damage property. You do have moving parts, you have gears and belts and all sorts of things, heated parts. If someone's working with a 3D printer or a router, it's very easy to snag a sleeve in one of those moving parts. So you'll probably want to have something in your policy before you start offering this to the public to absolve yourself of any kind of responsibility there. Those moving parts can also damage people as well as their clothes, so you'll want to make sure to plan ahead and ensure that if people come in with this, they don't leave like this. And this is a big one, especially with 3D printing. Creating the wrong kinds of material, just to put you guys at ease, it's not possible at this point with consumer level 3D printers for someone to just click a button and print a gun. They would have to print multiple parts and then put them together, so it would take a while and they would probably be observed. But just to be safe, of course, you want to have a policy in place that says don't do this. No guns, no knives, no drug paraphernalia, or whatever you want it to include. A few months ago, I attended a webinar called Makerspace's The Library's Legal Answers. I would recommend it highly if you were thinking about doing this. If they do a future iteration, I know that they do it periodically. If you can't make it to a live session, the presenters do have their slides available on SlideShare. So you can look that up, and there's tons of good information in there. Just to give you kind of a sample of what they said, with respect to Makerspace devices, they said that if a product's use is subject to a license, if you have to click OK to install the software, or you have to implicitly agree to this giant document of legalese when you open the box, your license is going to govern the use. Otherwise, law will prevail. So just in terms of indemnity, it might be kind of a good idea to go through that big block of legalese and read and see what it says before you start offering this stuff to the public. The presenters, Lipinski and McCord, also said that makerspaces could be considered a non-public forum, which means that we can set up exclusions for certain things. We can say that you can't print guns here, you can't print knives here, and all that sort of thing. And they mentioned these relevant laws from the U.S. Code. The first one would cover liability for unsupervised copying, and the other two deal with patent infringement. Essentially, my interpretation as a non-lawyer was that libraries, Lipinski and McCord said that libraries tend to worry a bit too much about this. They said as long as you have the appropriate signage and your policy in place, that's really going to remove any sort of, probable liability for your library. But again, I would recommend taking the webinar or at least checking their slides, which you can do for free on SlideShare. Okay, special considerations beyond legality and beyond all that sort of official business. Some of your patrons are not going to like this. Even if they see something as simple as you moving a 3D printer into your building, they won't like it. It's something new, it's change, and they're just not into it. I think this is where having those advocates in your community is a good idea, and also having a clear idea of what you're trying to accomplish with your space. so you can meet these people and just discuss with them why the library is doing this and talk about, we've always been a space that encourages creativity. Makerspaces can be noisy. They can have ambient byproducts that will get all over the place. So you'll want to plan how to control this so it doesn't affect the rest of your library. The person who's working on the 3D printer is basically equivalent to the person who's trying to read James Joyce in an easy chair or something. So both of them should have a place in the library, and your policy should guide how they don't necessarily bother one another. As we'll talk about, some devices do create wood shavings, they do create metal flakes, they do create noxious fumes. So with certain things, you'll want to be more aware of ventilation or plan for how to control other byproducts. Another issue would be maintenance. As I said, a lot of these companies are brand new, still in the Kickstarter phase. Most likely they're just guys working in a garage. So if your device goes bad, there might not necessarily be a maintenance person that you can turn to fix it. And many of these companies basically just disappear. The company that made our 3D printer, Solidoodle, as far as I can tell, they're gone. They're not answering emails, they're not answering calls, and orders aren't being filled. So if our device goes bad, I'll have to fix it myself, yeah.
There might be a second job there for you.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll call them in.
To give you guys some idea of how much you should budget for maintenance, there's a private makerspace called Artisans Asylum. They have 8,000 square feet of equipment, and their monthly maintenance budget is about $500 to $1,000 a month. But they're heavy use, heavier use than a library would see probably. I think you probably should go ahead and budget some funds to maintenance, but as far as how much is kind of in the air. Since we're talking about funding, you will have continuing costs with these guys. You will have to buy this filament for 3D printers because it goes pretty quickly. You will have to replace blades when they dull, or belts if they get worn through. You might need to buy additional software. A lot of these devices are made by people who are not necessarily thinking about your average Joe using this stuff. They're more or less designing it for people who are knowledgeable and people who are die-hard hobbyists. So even though the device comes with software, it might not be the best software ever. Our device came with a program that theoretically works, but the software is horrible. It's all graphic, and if you hover over the icons, it doesn't pop up and tell you what it does. You have to actually click it and see, well, this moves the extruder down into the bed, and this sort of thing. Thankfully, there's a program out there for 3D printers called Repetier Host that's free, and it's much better than what we got. But if your device comes with software that's not user-friendly or not easy to use, you might have to spring a little money to buy additional software. How are you going to plan for your space to grow? If it's very popular, your people might demand more. So how are you going to accommodate them if you're buying additional devices? Insurance considerations. I know you guys all have insurance, probably some sort of umbrella policy. If you wanted to check with your broker prior to implementing a makerspace, you'll probably want to avoid using the term makerspace because they won't know what that means. If you tell them the sorts of things that you have, or if you use words like craft shop or something like that, that might give them a little bit more guidance in terms of what you're planning to do. And the last thing, and it's very important, is please do not promise your users that they will have their item in an hour, because they won't. There are all kinds of problems that arise with these guys. Things get jammed. There are a million different parts. Some models don't work. So you might even have something in your policy that says the library does not guarantee a particular completion time, or that jobs will be done successfully at all. Okay, training, and we are moving right along. One thing I will tell you at the outset is some people think you can just put these items out there and just let people go crazy and let their creativity dictate what happens. I personally don't think that's the way to go. I think that if you have some sorts of projects canned and ready, that's pretty helpful because people see these and they're very cool, but they don't, if they haven't used a 3D printer, they don't know what it does, and just leaving them to their own devices is maybe not a good idea. I would definitely recommend that you let your staff get comfortable with these items before you reveal them to the public. Don't just do a simultaneous, hey staff and patrons, here's the 3D printer, so go crazy. You might take a month or two to let your staff get familiar with what the items do and the sorts of problems they might encounter. Again, this will depend on how much you're expecting your staff to help. So will you expect your staff to clear, melted plastic out of a hot extruder? Will you expect them to assist people when they bring in, their own designs to print something and it doesn't work out? So that sort of thing will be important. While your tools are staff only, you might think about training by having staff pick, say, a model for a 3D printer and go through the entire process of designing the model, augmenting and kind of customizing it, and then doing the 3D print themselves. So they end up with something finished. I think it's a good idea to use multiple formats as well. Some people are auditory learners, some people learn by viewing, and some people have to touch something to learn. So just thinking about multiple ways to present your training or present your support for your devices is probably a good idea. And just one second, I'm going to turn on our 3D printer because it takes forever to get started. Okay, so let's say you've done the research and you've planned everything to do your makerspace for your community. There's one more important step that you want to consider, and that would be marketing. You have to let people know that this stuff is out there, and people who tend to use makerspaces, some of them are already existing library users, but some of them aren't. Some of them are not people who keep up with happenings in the library. So if you can do a special event, I think that can be helpful, as a kickoff and to get people excited about this stuff. These are two examples of events that I thought were pretty great. This is from Loma, Colorado. It's a 3D printer event. And as you'll see, 3D printers take forever to print something, so you probably don't want to promise everyone that they'll be able to print their own thing. You might consider doing something like a raffle, which is what Loma did. Attendees enter the raffle and win a chance to print off their own design. That's probably a good idea. I think it's also a good idea to keep people's expectations managed. So this Teen 3D Printing meetup, they have pictures of items that can be 3D printed. If people hear about Makerspace stuff at all from the news, it's probably something that's kind of out of the ordinary, like I printed off my car, or I printed off an arm, and you won't be able to do that with your library 3D printer. So if you can tell them, if you can tell them, you can make a comb, you can make these bracelets, you can do a Yoda head, that might help to manage their expectations and avoid disappointment. We'll get a bit more into 3D printing in a moment here. For marketing, I think you should also have a space at your library, if possible, where you can show items that have been 3D printed or routed or vinyl cut or whatever, so that you can show people what's available and what you're doing in your building. And when it comes time to market and do these programs, obviously do flyers, do all your standard library stuff, but...
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine, no problem. Is that okay? You want to also consider other places, other venues. I would recommend eventful.com as a website. It basically just lists events in a particular region, concerts, classes, all that sort of thing. So if you're trying to get the word out about a big 3D printer kickoff or device makerspace kickoff, that's probably a good place to go. Okay, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about devices. Do you guys need a break? Okay, very good. This is not real time. This is a time-lapse photo of a 3D print. Basically, the way it works is it starts from the bottom. So I am going to step away from the laptop here, but this is a heated bed. It goes up to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And basically, the melted plastic comes out of that little nozzle. The nozzle's heated so the plastic melts inside, and it drips onto the heated bed. Since the bed is heated, it catches it at the bottom, and then it's kind of built up from there. These can be really, really big. So you can see they made some sort of piece of furniture here with this one, but mostly for consumer models, it's going to be about that size. You will need something to print, some kind of model. In most cases, with most programs, that means an STL model, and there are lots of those available for download. So you can start from scratch and make your own, or you can just grab one from one of these repositories. Let me show you that. So this is a Google SketchUp program, and I'm basically bringing in a model from the internet, the Nebraska State Capitol. So we'll import it in. And it shows up in this 3D sort of viewer, so I can go all the way around, up and down. I can make changes to this model before I print. If I don't like the guy sitting on top of the Capitol, I can take him off. I can embed my name in it or do anything like that. So you can make all sorts of changes before you actually print. This is Google SketchUp. It's a free program. Yep, it's a free program. It's basically just for design purposes, but it can handle 3D prints as well. There are other programs that you can use in addition to SketchUp. There are all kinds of different ones. One that's a little more simplified that might be good for younger people is Tinkercad, because it's very straightforward. It's shapes and click and drag and so on. Tinkercad, C-A-D. And then there are more robust ones, like this is Blender, which gives you all kinds of tools and all kinds of settings that you can change.
These programs, does it give you an estimated print time?
Some of them do. Actually, most of them do. These are more or less design programs, so they allow you to augment 3D printed designs, and they would go out to a program like Repetier Host to actually send it to the printer. Yeah, so you'll need probably more than one program to. If you don't want to do any of that stuff, if you're just getting started, there are, as I said, online libraries of designs that you can use, and one of the biggest is Thingiverse. So these are already formatted designs that you can bring in and sort of 3D print. You can make changes to these if you want. But they are basically all ready to go.
Like a hand grenade.
Yeah, the hand grenade.
Sorry.
That's fine. We'll look at this a bit more in just a second when we actually 3D print something. So one other place you can go that might be helpful and might be a good selling point to your users is McMaster-Carr is a distributor of basically anything you'd need for devices. So they sell nuts and washers and all sorts of things like that. And for some reason, they have 3D printed models available on their website. So if you wanted to go this route, you could tell your patrons, if your refrigerator needs a hinge, we can 3D print it for you rather than have you try to find it somewhere. Okay, in addition to your 3D printer, your computer, your modeling software, and your 3D printer software, you will need the stuff to print. And that would be a variety of materials. At this point, you can print with a ton of different stuff, and there are all kinds of special considerations for each one. Nylon is pretty new, I think, and when you 3D print with nylon, you will have to probably bake it in your oven at a low setting for a few hours to get it to cohere and not break. For the most part, people are still using either ABS or PLA. They basically look the same. They look like little pieces of plastic, like fishing line, like this. And they come in a variety of colors. Each one has strengths and weaknesses. So ABS is actually made out of oil. That's what we use here at the Commission. It's really sturdy, it's really strong, so if you're printing something like a hinge or a part that's going to get a lot of friction or heat, ABS is a good way to go. It also, because it's made out of oil, has a kind of a bad smell as it's being printed. And it's flammable. So, yeah, it's not flammable the way that, say, a vat of gasoline would be flammable, but you know, you don't necessarily want to make candle holders or ashtrays out of ABS plastic. PLA is made from cornstarch and sugar cane, so the smell isn't bad. It's actually really sweet and it smells nice, but it is much weaker than ABS. So your items that are printed are going to be more prone to cracking, and they'll be less resistant to strain and stress and all that sort of thing. In terms of cost, there's a wide range of costs for consumer model printers. They go from the low end of $300 to around $6,000. And if you're talking about something that's really more of a Cadillac model, they can go up into the tens of thousands. So it sort of just depends on what you want and, you know, the kind of quality you're paying for. For the filament, for the spool of plastic, generally about $20 to $25. And again, the length of time you'll have it depends on what's being printed. So if you print something that's gigantic and intricate, you'll use up your plastic obviously a lot faster than if you're just doing buttons. But this kind of gives you an estimate of what you can expect. 392 chess pieces out of this one spool. Okay, do you guys have any questions so far? Oh, I'm sorry, man. And just to let you know, I will email you all this stuff. So if you miss, you know, taking notes or something, I'll send it in the email as well.
Do you have a place that you suggest is a better place to get filament? In other words, is Amazon pretty much the place to go? They're looking at prices and they seem to be? They
generally, in terms of pricing and selection, they're pretty good, yes. There are a ton of different vendors who do nothing but 3D printer stuff. One thing about filament that I probably should mention is that some 3D printers only use proprietary filament. So if you wanted to, you know, get a refill, you have to go to the company who made your printer. That's something I would avoid, to be honest with you, because like I said, these companies can come and go. So if the company goes out of business and your 3D printer only uses their filament, you're kind of out of luck. Okay, well, I wanted to show you the process of doing a 3D print. Would you guys like to take a break or grab some candy before we get started with that?
Sure.
Okay, it's in the back.
Oh, there's candy
Yes.
back there?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
You can't get around. Right. Is that what we said?
Yeah, it's kind of right.
And while we're taking a break, if you guys would like to come up, I've got some 3D printed stuff up here if you want to see it.
Do you keep yours behind closed doors, or do you keep it in the open?
It's in an open area.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's public library, the first time I went, they had it behind closed doors, and then the second time I went, they had them out. They had a couple of them. And she said they brought them out and they were located close to the reference desk because people were using them because they were behind the doors.
Mhm.
But the one thing that they were making at the time, it's like a little, jar, the dark blue like that. And it was the fourth try. Because something kept happening, so, kept breaking down. Something happened anyway. And so the library staff were left to finish it, to try and get it finished for the patron. Because they usually like the patron to stay there.
Sure.
I mean, it can take hours.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I mean, it's really a neat concept.
I think it'll get better as time goes on, but it is at this point still.
Yeah. In Omaha we have the Do Space, and one of the young ladies that works for us, she works there too, and she said that they did a hand for a little boy that lost his hand. I thought that was really what a neat concept that would be.
I went to Computers in Libraries earlier this year, and they had a whole seminar on that project. Apparently, that's something they're doing in multiple libraries. The artificial hand.
But there was a lot that you brought up that I, didn't think about, like these policies and stuff. Yeah, I would never think about having a policy, like because the patron gets hurt and that.
Unfortunately, yes.
I think a lot of that policies come after something happens.
I think you're right,
And
yes.
then you put, oh, we need a policy.
Right.
But it's very interesting. And then the public, my daughter was like always in their public library were free.
I was just literally going to ask them that question, because I kind of came in.
I don't know how much it gets used,
Don't know.
but they had.
Is there any school people?
They had three.
Okay. Public library
fantastic.
people?
I'm from Bell University.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Southeast. They also, I did a workshop on this.
So where are you?
They also have a branch of the library.
And
They
I have no idea.
it's all electronic media.
Fantastic, yeah.
Right by Southwest, which is the busiest place, but they have all the computers.
I recognize your face, so.
I thought that was really neat.
I'm from Gretna Middle School.
They have them like in,
Yes.
it wasn't until I started researching, that I found out they have Philadelphia, Seattle,
Like
San
our
Francisco.
industrial.
But, Boise, Idaho.
So it's just over the kiosk, basically? Automated?
Well, no, it's right by a gate.
I think our high school is more along
It's
that
because this
line.
area.
You know what I mean? It has
here.
more, but.
And they have all computers.
I have.
It's all computers.
Well,
And then they have an area where you can sit and read and
trying
force
to have
people to plug in their
run
phones
the
and
last year
stuff
and a half,
like
and
that.
it's, you know, we have.
And it wasn't the,
So, you know,
it
not
was
too
the
bad, but
director of the
Yeah,
airport,
it's
and
kind of
she
hard.
came through Philadelphia,
Just getting all these
and
pieces
she
in
had
place
a
and knowing
Philadelphia airport.
we just got.
And she noticed that there was a library there,
Towards the end of the year.
and she said, I can do this. So she got back and contacted the director of the
Kids.
public library, and they got together and
Okay,
created this
you know,
area.
and wanting to try it,
Yeah,
when we run it.
yeah. And like, you and I know being members, you could,
But what have you been doing?
read their electronic books and all of that
Can I
while
just
you're
say,
there.
all I have
You
to say
couldn't
is
check
the
them
word
out.
Right.
The people
Yeah.
that live there,
It's
they can
pretty
sign
much,
up for their library card right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really forward thinking.
worried
Isn't
about
it, you know,
Minecraft now with Microsoft. You bought it,
Fantastic.
and now kind of, they're taking control of it, and it's gonna be an interesting change. But I have kids who, they just love it, the Minecraft. I also have, kids who are looking at doing some more of the, wearable electronics, sewing. I have a couple kids who do, green screen stuff. I have kids who do, GarageBand, that's a biggie. Just trying to think, well, I mean, but see, that's, to me, I told the kids, I said, I'm here just to let you take something you've learned in a class, because like our tech class, we only have it for maybe 6 weeks. or 9 weeks, and then they're done. Then they can't get to the items that are there. So that's what I said our makerspace is supposed to be. It's a chance for you. You've learned it. If you want to still continue with it, you come here.
Mhm.
I've got little hacker boys. I've got some kids that are real, honest to God hacker kids, and they will help with anything because they love to show off their stuff. So if we're doing coding, we did code.org. I had like 300 kids. We have 1,000 kids. I had 300 kids do code.org. And so I get these kids involved in it, and then they'll go to classes, different classes and stuff, and help those kids. So if I didn't have my little hacker, mostly boys, some girls, but mostly boys that will like to show themselves off, will not leave the library at a decent time.
You guys
That helps a
make dinner.
lot.
Yeah, you're
If you get a few kids or students that are really good at what they're doing, it helps you a lot because I'm constantly running all the time for different things. So just you have to like have a little staff of students that will help out, or it doesn't work very well.
So do you have, see, because that's with mine is that I only, just again, we have 1,000 kids too, but it's only meant for 700. And we're just bursting out of seeing half of my library is now gone. And I say that because as he's talking about making sure you have space for stuff and snow lines, you know. But, so I can only do it after school. I can't let the kids get into the stuff, which is sad. It's something I wish I could do, but I can't let them use the things during the school day because we don't have the space right now. We don't have an area to just.
So you go all portable.
The 3D printers are on a counter in our area because the principal was very concerned with a lot of the things you were talking about, the idea of the hot, you know, and everything. So
The first thing that would happen, I'd have kids printing penises.
Yeah.
yeah, and that's, you know,
First thing.
yeah, and middle schools and yeah, we had that, and then you guys all know, the craziness. But then everything else is in, I have 2 shelves that I should be using for books, but I just made it a place to keep the items, and like I said, we have, it's just, we try and shut it all in, and you just make space for where, you know what I mean, where we can, and kids know that they just can't get into it, you know.
See, I have a computer lab that used to, we're a one-to-one. So where before we had computer labs, now that space is empty because we don't have computer labs anymore. We just have one small lab. So I have a nice space where we can set stuff up and do whatever. And we do it all day long. You know, the library's open at 7:30 in the morning, school doesn't start till 8:05. People have time over lunch, people have time after school, people have study halls, so kids are in and out all the time. We haven't done a 3D printer though, actually in the library yet. That's where we're going to move to. We've done Legos, we have those little iRobot things, we have just little kits of stuff, like a solar thing and different things. So we did that coloring, all that stuff. We did a big coloring thing. We've done tons of different things like that.
Just throwing this out, you said that about the coloring. I don't know if you guys know that, but if you send to Staples or Office Depot online, you can make sure it's really good pixelization, but if you send it to them, and you can have them print out what they call an engineering print. For about $7, you can get a color sheet that's the size of this table and wider of whatever your design is, and oh my gosh.
They're putting them on tables.
Yeah, we put them on,
like they'll just put it on
we
the
put it on a
library
table, and the kids went over there, and I was like, wow, and they were, and it was like a big owl or a big flower or whatever. You can get some of mine. But, I was like, wow, for $70, that was the best money I've ever spent. So, Just meant that's not for the.
That was from Staples, you said?
I went through Staples because it's just the closest to me, but I know that Office Depot and Office Max do the same thing. It's just, like I said, it's called, like I said, or whatever. And it's like meant for blueprints, so if you're not sure, and I actually took one into the store, and they did it too, so you can give a flash drive with, but like I said, really, really good pixelization, or pixels, because make sure it's really good, because not obviously pixelated, but the kids were like, they didn't care, they just had a great time with it, so it was good.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. No, it's great. Okay. Well, I thought before we get back into the slideshow part, we could do a little 3D printing and give you guys some examples of how that works. I know some of you are already familiar with it, so. Let's see, our bed is at 120 degrees and our extruder nozzle is at 200 degrees, so you guys might see some plastic filament slipping out of the nozzle there. That's just part of it. One of the sites that I mentioned is Thingiverse, and that has pretty much a ton of different projects. You can grab one of the ones on their feature section here, like a skull pencil holder for this T-Rex skull. Or you can search, or you can just go up here to explore and explore their things. Oops, there we go. So this, just looking through the site might give you some good ideas about how your printer could be used and what sort of things you might expect. Planes, spaceships, case for smartphones, bottle openers. Is there anything you're dying to see printed today?
Just pick something amazing.
Something amazing.
Yeah, something that you personally were like, wow.
Well, I don't want to keep you guys here until tomorrow. These guys are very slow.
Something small.
Something small and amazing. Okay.
Do they have anything, like, can you pick by size? Because, like, ours is very small.
Mm-hmm.
It only has a 5x5 bed.
I don't believe you can pick by size, but you could do something like small as a search. How about this boat?
Yes.
Oh, that's cute. I like that.
And as I'll show you, you can actually rescale items. So if you pick something that goes beyond your parameters of your printer, you can scale it down, make it smaller. So I am going to download this thing. Actually, before I do that, let me look at the comments and make sure it's... Okay, so I think it'll probably work. Cross your fingers. We'll just download it as a zip file. Extract it. Okay, and if you have a Windows 10 computer, that actually includes native 3D printing software. So when you click it and open it up, it opens right up in your 3D builder. The nice thing about this is it'll tell you if something is not going to work. One or more objects is invalidly defined. We'll try to repair it by clicking it and just see if this works.
So you tell us that Windows is
I'm sorry?
Are we going to have to have Windows?
No, it's just helpful to have this because it does tell you if something's not going to work, and that way you don't waste your time and your filament. Thingiverse is like a Wikipedia sort of thing. Anybody can upload whatever to it, so it's not checked. And it looks like it fixed it, theoretically. We'll see how this plays out in printing. I am going to...
I think that's another thing too, like you had mentioned earlier, people don't understand. It can take an hour, the smallest thing.
Well, yeah, don't make it solid. You know, just get out right.
But that's like a learning curve for kids, I think, too. You know, you can't send something behind it. You tie up the machine for 5 hours.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, if anything goes wrong during that printing process, it blows the entire model. We had an Eiffel Tower we were printing, and it got right to almost the top and just pulled off the bed, and it was, yeah. So I'm going to bring my print into this program. Let's see, here's my chip. And it's pretty small. This is basically showing me the top here. I can rotate, move this all the way around. If I wanted to scale it down, I could do so over here. So I have my scale option. I can make it smaller or bigger. 0.8, 3 for a giant boat, but we'll leave it at 1. You can move it on your bed here, so move it to the back corner. That seems to be a good spot. Because it's built up in layers, you will have to have a program that handles slicing, that slices it up and tells the machine how much filament to use for each particular layer. Repetier Host has this built in automatically, so you just click Slice with Slicer. Well, our bed has spots that are basically the coating has ripped up a little bit. So when it tries to print over there, it's printing partially on the coating material and then partially on the exposed metal. So that makes it a little uneven. Well, it's working with the machine. The machine actually came with a program that was not great, so Repetier Host is an alternative. And it's running the slicer. Well, that's doing its thing, and I think it's done. I will tell you that, I don't know if you guys have used 3D scanners at all, for those of you who have existing makerspaces. Those are available, and they can sort of scan objects into these models, but it's a very inexact science because it's scanning just the exterior. It's not really doing anything to provide support, so the computer does the best it can, but 3D scanned STL files are generally kind of hit or miss. Okay, and this is done. It tells me the filament required is 12.5 centimeters, so we'll go ahead and try to print this off. And if you guys would like, I can open this up so you can see the process, or if you just want to watch it through the door, that's fine as well. Okay, so this will take a while. It does tell you at the bottom of the program screen, and actually at the top, it's got an estimated time of about 45 minutes. So we'll just leave it going. Hopefully the smell doesn't bother you all.
We'll open the door.
Very good. And also, if you would keep an eye on it, if it starts to, pull that off the bed, just let me know and I'll stop and hopefully fix it. So anyway, while that's operating, we'll go into some of the other devices that you guys could have. Laser cutters are basically exactly what the name suggests. They use a laser to send, basically just kind of cut into a piece of material to cut out designs. It kind of looks like this, so it's really cool. You can take a piece of metal, use your laser to cut out holes and things like that. And these work on metal, they work on wood, acrylic, and all these other materials. Laser cutters are probably the item that you would most need preparation to handle in your library, because a laser is actually destroying material. So this does emit some sort of noxious fumes. You can use them to make things like this iPhone case or this map of the U.S. The finished products are very cool. These can also be gigantic, so they can take up an entire wall. This is probably a more typical size for a library. This is the Epilogue Mini laser. If it's on a desktop, it would probably take up approximately 3/4 of this tabletop.
How much does one of those cost?
The Epilogue, I don't know. Let's see. Some of the larger ones can be in the thousands of dollars or tens of thousands. Okay, 3,000. Sorry. All right. We'll try eBay. That's maybe a... Okay, there's an Epilogue Mini for $5,000. So, yeah, the laser cutters are going to be higher ticket items. And I know it's probably difficult to see, but as I said, these do emit these sort of noxious fumes. They are using a laser to destroy material, so you will probably need to think about ventilation. You might be able to see this piping in the back here. It's almost like a dryer vent. That's pretty much exactly the size and material for most laser cutters. Some people just stick them by an open window. I don't know if that's, yeah, I don't know if I'd feel secure doing that. There is one model that hasn't been released yet that claims to have a charcoal filter underneath the cutter, so that takes care of the fumes theoretically. As far as I know, no one's seen that in action, so I don't know how effective that is or how true that claim is. And most cutters still do use this ventilation procedure to get rid of those fumes. Another larger item would be vinyl cutters, and these essentially use saw blades, sharp cutting tools to cut into vinyl. They engrave text and design, so you can make stickers or labels and various other things like that. Kind of works like this. It doesn't really produce any byproducts like laser cutters or like, 3D printer does in minimal amounts, so it's not really a consideration in terms of hazardous fumes or byproducts, but you probably will have a bit of excess material under the cutter. And these are generally in the hundreds of dollars as opposed to the thousands of dollars. You will need software to operate these, not necessarily 3D software like we use for the 3D printer, but basically just something to make a design. Adobe Illustrator and CorelDRAW are probably two of the more prevalent programs with this kind of device. Stop me at any time if you guys have questions or anything. CNC routers are big. They are enormous. They do not fit on tabletops. They basically use, computer designs that are then fed to this router that has a little piece that carves stuff into wood or other materials. So you can make very elaborate signage here. You can make musical instruments. You can make chairs and furniture.
I think we have one of those down in Industrial Tech.
Do you?
And it cuts metal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like butter smooth, but it costs like $20,000.
Yeah, they're pricey.
Where did you tech people get all this from?
It's our industrial technology. We partnered with industry, and they have pumped $200,000 into our industrial tech because they have such a shortage of skilled laborers. So those kids will do like 2 years there, and then they go right into CCC and finish their program in a year, and then they're skilled labor people. So just the businesses in the area.
You guys at you guys have this at that new high school, that career academy?
They have something. I don't know exactly what all, but I know they just do involved with it. And we're not allowed to go down there because of the high school part of it. So it's limited to people that are involved in it.
Well, I mean, I would say, we don't just let every kid go down there to cut them.
No, I mean the whole career academy. It's because of the LPS,
The liability.
liability of the student, when the student can't come into the college unless they come to move.
Okay. Some of our kids go out to CCC during the school day too.
Yeah, well, after school hours, who knows whether they're an LPS student or an SEC student, so we wouldn't know. But that's just the way LPS set it up.
We did our financing through our foundation so that when those companies donate how much ever money, then that's a tax write-off for them too.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how they did it.
Does Bill, you think about doing this just one open place for kids to come in, or?
This is just a we're like a strategic plan part of that. That is just giving confidence. So field test they should want to get the money, right? But just
Right, well, again, just, okay, it's trying to work with local community college and so on, it's like, to me, I think this might be the way from, okay, yeah, I'm almost school here, but, we're just, I don't see a lot of them, but I can see the high schools and local colleges doing more together to establish for itself, and so that's why I was just asking if that was something you guys had.
we haven't got that maybe that next one. Maybe if you come into our library, look at our library, it's a very traditional library. So it's like what we have to do.
if you want to keep your library alive, you have to have a reason for those people to come to it. Yeah. I mean, you have to. I mean, you're not. I mean, people can do all their research online now, which is a great thing.
You can't, not all the programs have everything on
Right.
that. That's one thing, they wanted us at SEC to get rid of all of our books. I just had a dream about that. They gave me another statement. But anyway, like medical lab technology, they don't have everything online. And they have accreditation standards. They get visited and they have certain materials and certain books.
Yeah, it's the same with us.
Yeah.
We just want to keep it accreditation. You have to have so much of it in your library. And physically in your library and online.
And so it's hard for people to understand that, yes, there's still something, a lot of it is online, and college students do want books. Our students still want books. you say, here's an ebook you can read, Cultures and Customs of Mexico for a sociology class. You have it in print, I want to check it out.
I don't want that. Well, they're starting to put out quite a few, I think even, yeah, great for somebody, well, I'm not doing that anymore. But they're talking about how they're finding that e-reading as a whole, computer, pad, whatever, it's the kids particularly, but it's too hard for them.
Yeah.
It's not, they don't, like I said, early studies have been showing that for students, this is not the way to go. Because they can't do this well enough.
We have an overdrive account, that I put a certain amount of my book budget into, and I buy regular fiction and popular nonfiction, because kids do like to read books. However, as far as like buying any research things, like they're outdated before they're printed. And we have EBSCO, and we have Electric Library, and we just have stuff, and that stuff's updated every day. So if somebody's doing, a research project on something newer, you just can't get it in a book anymore.
Yeah.
And if you're doing something older, like we do History Day stuff, so we use Library of Congress, we use Digital Public Library. Google has a lot of that stuff that's in the free domain. Instead of having to buy all of those books for individual, and we do buy some stuff in books, but a lot of this stuff is just more available online.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm just saying, I just don't.
Yeah, and our campus really got me from this to our students are
Right, yes.
they're online students. They're not even physically in Bellevue or they're all over the place.
And when I'm taking online classes, I don't know about you guys, I always buy the ebooks. Because I can keyword search them. They're so much more user-friendly when it's a textbook. I'm not reading it for pleasure or anything. I need to know where this thing is in the book, and all I have to do is keyword search it. But if I'm reading a fiction book, yeah, I'd rather read a book. Yeah.
All right, well, it's okay.
Did we give you enough break here?
That's great, thank you, yeah.
Half the votes, it's doing okay.
Is it? It's all right?
We're doing well.
Okay. One other thing about the CNC router, you might have seen this in your area there, is it does produce sawdust and metal shavings, so it kind of needs to be in its own space. You don't want to put it in the middle of your floor in your public area. And robotics. This is the Sphero. It's modeled after the BB-8 machine from Star Wars. I'm not a sci-fi person, sorry. But
No? What? No, we need to move that. You need to move that way.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, the head, which is riding on the thing in the back, is magnetized. So if it's sitting on top of the actual Sphero ball, it'll stay on top even though the ball is moving. It's really cool. And hopefully this will work so I can show it to you.
Oh, the dog.
Okay, so that's the Sphero. That's the BB-8 branded. They also have another model that's basically just a clear ball, so you can see the workings inside, the machinery and the circuits and so on. And Sphero is not the only manufacturer. There's also the Dash and Dot kit. The big guy is Dash, and you can basically use these much like the Sphero device, just to move it around and make noise and lights and so on. And let me get the exact name for this guy. This is the OzoBot, which is around $60. You actually program this by holding it up to your computer screen, and it gets flashes of light that tell it what to do. In the video, the Sphero BB-8 was more or less being used as kind of a toy. You can drive it on the app and so on. But these computer kits, or these robot kits, do allow you to program, which kind of fits into the whole creative side of a makerspace. Dash and Dot use Blockly, which you guys have probably used in your coding sessions. You basically just, use the stuff on the left to give it a sequence of commands, and then the robot does what's asked of it, theoretically.
How much is the BB-8?
The BB-8 is just over $100. That's also the case for the Clear Sphero, and the Dash and Dot would be $150. You get 2 robots with those. Okay, and then from robotics to sort of old standards, sewing and embroidery. those are actually really popular topics in Makerspaces. Everything from your basic sewing machine that you guys have probably all seen at some point, to one of these monstrous embroidery machines that take up an entire tabletop. And this one, I believe, is around $400. You could also go very old school and get a loom for your Makerspace. The devices vary in terms of how independent they are, especially, your sewing devices. They can be computer controlled, they can be standalone, or they can be a hybrid of both. This embroidery machine actually has a USB port, so you go to your computer, figure out what you want to do, save it on your flash drive, and then plug it right into your embroidery machine, and it does the job.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I go up and look at it right now.
Oh.
So it's doing fine, but it's just going onto that next layer so that they can see it.
Mm-hmm.
It closed up isn't it hollow?
Oh yeah, if you guys want to come up and take a look at it, Sorry, I panicked. I thought it was starting to have an attack of some sort.
Looking cute.
It's coming
But
together.
just so you can see what it is actually doing in the mixture.
Going into it.
We'll have a smell. It wasn't too strong.
It's like solid things, and that's actually when we're starting to do some programming with the kids, and that's one of the things we tell them, if you don't want it to be solid, it's been a line, then it would have been about 6 hours, but we're done, and it wastes so much of the, well, and it depends, obviously, what you're making.
Mhm.
If you're, creating, the kids all love it. They talk about how they send these up to the space station.
Mhm.
So that they make the tools now. They don't send tools up there because they never do. They said what they do is they send those up with filament, and they create. Now if they need a tool, they just create it on here and then use it when they're happy where they need to. Let it go. Then they make another one. That's what I'm saying. They just they've discovered that that's how they.
Our kids built a 3D printer using a 3D printer to build the pieces to build the 3D printer.
Wow. I forgot to ask you.
Yes.
I apologize.
Sure.
Do you guys, have you done anything with the other types of filaments that they have out now, like?
No, we had talked about basically the chocolate printer.
Yeah. See, you guys could have for your culinary stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen those in action, so I'm not sure how effective they are. But
I would like to. I wondered because I had seen. Because I look at it this way, if it ends up being a blob, it's still chocolate.
yeah, exactly.
How long do those take to print?
Well, again, I think it depends. I've heard, that's why I didn't know if because I've never seen
That's
one
like a
or whatever.
win-win situation. If it looks
You
terrible, you have to eat it.
You have to use it, yeah, you have to use it. They've said that you have to have one all by itself, but you can't, a separate one, but you can't change the filament out, that would be good, but yeah, you can make I'm sitting here thinking, you got a catering business, they drink chocolate or whatever things you make, but they even have filaments now that are made of different types of wood. Do you use that?
Yes.
Again, I just wondered if you use, that's why I said I just.
No, so far we've only used the ABS filament, but
That's okay, my plastic's only white.
oh really?
We can only use, with the printers we got, because we got a PE one. And so, but I wanted that. I got to thinking with plastics, because for our kids, again, different situation depending on what level, but with our kids, when they can take everything smaller than markers. So
Right.
Because I'm not as worried about, we're starting the different programming, but you get older kids having these different kinds of film, and that plays a part in it. Program, it's a higher level programming. So I'm just curious.
Do you find that you have to do any maintenance between prints? Basically, we have to clean our bed with hairspray or Windex. Otherwise, it's...
So far, no,
Mhm.
but haven't done, like, so we just got ours towards the end of the year, so we haven't had to do the plan yet. So, yes, I'm sure we will. I mean, I'm sure. My thing is that I wish there was something you could paint or whatever, for lack of a better term, to refinish the bed, to keep it, you know what I mean?
I've actually heard that some people use strips of painter's tape, the blue painter's tape, and just lay it down as level as possible, and that...
Seems to help.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Oh, circuit boards and maker kits. These are your small, kind of low-cost items, but I think they're actually pretty robust in terms of what you get and can do with them. This is the Makey kit, and I'm going to show you another video just because it shows you all the projects that are available with it.
Oh, this is fun.
Okay, so that's the Makey. And the reason I like that video is because this is really one of the lower end circuit kits. This is less than $50 to buy one, so you can do a ton of stuff with it. There are other options. The SparkFun Inventors Kit has a ton of stuff. It's around $100. And there's the LilyPad Design Kit, which is specifically made to be incorporated into textiles and wearables. So if you use it, you can end up with projects like this, like a lighted shirt or something, this little scrunchie that has lights embedded. There is a blog called Computational Textiles. If you're interested in this kind of thing, they have tons of projects and tons of ideas. Definitely recommend checking those out. Video equipment is also something that might be used in your makerspace, green screens, cameras, and so on. For cameras, you do have some alternatives. Some people go with the higher-end DSLR cameras, and these can handle video as well as still photography. If that is out of your price range, since those do tend to be a bit pricier, there are action cameras like the GoPro that work just as well for most projects. One of you said that you guys had a video section in your area. You do? Do you find that it's used pretty often?
In and out. It depends on kind of what the kids, again, what they've learned.
Mhm.
We do. We do a green screen, blah, blah, blah. We have like a student television, or, they have like a student web page where they do stories.
Mhm.
And then I have kids that do documentaries and stuff for classes, so we use it a reasonable amount.
Have you guys gone with the sort of higher end cameras, or using really just?
Higher end I have a really nice camera,
Mhm.
but I don't let the kids use it.
Sure.
I have some reasonable cameras that they use, or if I'm in there, they can use it. I think light is a big thing.
Mhm.
Like we have hung a lot of lights so that when you do the green screen, it's easier to edit with it. Because if you're like a not so good camera with a really bad lighting, you're screwed. But
Right.
Yeah,
if you have some good lighting, you don't
I was
have to
gonna
use
say,
that. You can use a $300 or $400
we don't
camera.
do the big green screen like human, it's like all in the green screen, they do that in class. What we did, to be honest with you, is we had a big box
Mhm.
from, had one of our computers in it. So, and I say that because it's not as deep, it's fairly shallow, but it's small, and they do a lot of,
Stop motion video.
stop motion video. What we had were, I'm trying to think of a store, Oriental Trading Company had a bunch of animals, vendables,
Mhm.
that they got for like, it was like 100 of them, and the kids use that. They just use an iPad. They just have an iPad that they use, videotape, and everything. So that is kind of, we're still like, again, Bill's big difference. You know what I mean? We keep things.
I have kids that do Legos, or they'll do like little paper
Mhm.
things, and do those stop motion ones. And they'll do them for a class presentation. Say you're supposed to present something on the French Revolution, and